I've been looking at the developing literature on short-term versus long-term mating strategies in men. And I've been particularly interested in this in relation to the sexual revolution, because in principle, what the sexual revolution did with its decrease of strictures of sexual behavior, but also the provision of hypothetically functional birth control, is it made it less risky for women to engage in short-term sexual behavior. Okay, but there's a question that comes up along with that that's a very interesting one. So, in the broad biological community, there are two types of mating pattern, right? There's the R strategy and the K strategy. And the R strategy types have zero investment in their offspring. They produce a lot of offspring, sometimes millions or even more, but almost all of them die. There's no post-coital investment. And then on the other side, there are human beings where it's few offspring, very, very high investment. But within human beings, that same distribution applies. Yeah, well, so there's a developing literature, which you may be well aware of, identifying the personality traits of the short-term maters. And the short-term male maters are dark tetrad types. They're narcissistic, psychopathic, Machiavellian, and sadistic, which is, a nice addition to the group. And so this is a very interesting development as well, as far as I'm concerned, because it does seem to imply that as you tilt a society towards sexual freedom, let's say on the hedonistic side, it looks to me like you deliver the women over to the short-term mating males, and they have those personality characteristics that we just described.
Absolutely, yes.
That seems like a bad idea.
I would say you are correct. From the work I've done on narcissism and relationships, which is pretty significant, you find narcissism predicts short-term mating. You find narcissists are more extroverted, so they're more attractive. They're more attractive when you meet this grandiose narcissism. So when you meet people narcissistic, they're more attractive. They spend more time grooming, so they look better when they're mating. They're also willing to cheat on their spouse. So even if you're in a steady relationship, if you're narcissistic, you're like, well, I can go cheat on the side. That'll be okay. They tend to alternative partners more than other people. So there's all these different mechanisms in place that mean that if there's a lot of short-term mating going on, the people doing it are going to be overrepresented by narcissists. And on the apps, you're going to find the same thing.
Yeah. Well, so I'm so interested in this because it seems to me to lay out a plausible pathway to doing something like solving the is-ought problem with regards to sexual morality. Because a real serious question arose, let's say at the beginning of the 60s, right? It's a question that might be the entire reason for the culture war. There's probably more, but it's a big one. It's like, okay, so now women have the pill. All right, so that makes them very different than women before the pill, like radically different, because now they're the first females that have ever existed that have voluntary control over their reproductive function. So that's a huge deal. Okay, so what does that mean? It means the definition of woman itself has to be rejigged. Okay, now does it mean that women can tilt towards the same more profligate reproductive strategy that men use? Because that could be an outcome. In fact, that's the promise of the sexual revolution, essentially. But it looks to me like the consequence of that is that women turn themselves over to the immature, narcissistic, self-grooming, showy men who can't commit, who don't want a long-term relationship, who don't make good fathers because, well, they're not very likely to stick around, for example. And so then, I think we're at the point already, perhaps, and I'd like your view on this, that one of the things that psychologists can tell young women is that the shorter term mating strategy game you play, the more likely you are to end up in the hands of a psychopathic partner.
Absolutely. That is, if you're going for short-term mating, the other people involved are going to be less agreeable, less interested in deep emotional connection, and they're going to be more interested in their own power and pleasure from sexual conquest, which means you're going to get more narcissists and psychopaths. It's just like the math of the situation. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm not a prude in any way. I mean, this is literally just the math of when you set things up this way, this is what you're going to get. It's like saying, hey, I meet guys at bars. I'm like, well, the people you meet at a bar are going to be different than you meet at the charity picnic. Just a different selection of people.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky for women too, because, they also have this additional problem, which is that the dependent, hyper-obedient losers are also going to be the nice guys who are hanging around the nice situations. And that's also not a good deal for them, right? But it is the psychopathic end of it is quite frightening because, well, the literature, when personality psychologists started to investigate subclinical psychopathy and develop the dark triad formulation, right? So that was narcissistic, so wanting unearned social status, Machiavellian, manipulative, and psychopathic, which is predatory and parasitical. That's a pretty bad combination,
yes,
right? And they were the ones, but it wasn't bad enough. This is the thing that's so terrifying because further investigation showed that formulation wasn't complete till you added sadism, which was positive delight in the unnecessary suffering of others.
Yes.
And so what women have to understand is that, you're not only turning yourself over to the, excitement-seeking, narcissistic, self-centered guys. I mean, that might be bad enough. But if you're also turning yourself over to the sadists, which seems to be the case, because those four things are pretty tightly associated, then you're really looking for a spot of positive misery. And so if that isn't what you're pursuing, you might want to temper your thrill seeking with the idea that hanging about the psychopathic predatory parasites is probably not the world's best idea.
Yeah, and the sadism is scary. I mean, you've the old research where they'd see if people would, grind bugs in a coffee grinder or something. It was like grinding pill bugs. I mean, the sadism is, really dark. It's taking pleasure in people's suffering. I think the challenge for women is they are attracted to guys who have confidence and ambition and seem like they have a direction. And you run into guys that are like, I'm a nice guy. And I go, I don't know if you're nice so much as you're kind of a loser. And, and so the problem is if you're selecting for guys who are ambitious, half those ambitious guys are going to be pretty nice guys and half of them are going to be kind of self-centered and maybe more problematic, and it's hard to know the difference. So it's very hard for women out there.
Well, this is also why the evidence also suggests that it's the younger and less experienced women who are more likely to fall for the machinations of the psychopathic predators, because they can't distinguish between competence, confidence, and false confidence.
Yeah. Because you're young. And the other thing with narcissism, and you see this a lot, is when you first meet people, when you first start dating, the way our culture works is we go from sort of fun relationships that are exciting to deep and emotional relationships. And so at that fun stage, the people who are narcissistic are just more attractive. Like if I meet somebody who's really narcissistic, I'm like, oh, this person's fun. We'll go out drinking. It'll be great. And then later on, I'm like, we want to really have a high trust relationship. It's the wrong person. So our whole system is designed to put people with people that are more narcissistic and not people who are going to be good in the long term. Just where our system works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's another complexity there that you pointed to as well, which is that, and we could make this rule of thumb. It's like, almost all losers will attempt to pass themselves off as nice guys. But and I mean the infantile dependent types. I'm not infantile and dependent. I'm nice. Well, so some nice guys are competent, but all infantile losers, except those who've fallen completely off the edge of the world and are resentful beyond belief, they're going to pass themselves off as nice guys. Now, if you're hanging around with the predatory psychopaths, even in the initial short-term stages of a relationship, you're not going to have to contend with the false nice guy problem, right? And that's a major problem, because what woman in her right mind wants a dependent man? That's like, you might as well just have a child, right? At least the child has an excuse. Yeah. And so by being attracted to the more dominating types, you solve the nice guy problem, but
exactly.
The next problem is that you throw your hand. Okay.
That is very well put. You solve the dependent problem, but you get the psychopath problem. So you solve one problem, but you end up with another problem. And I think this is so important, because I get tired of guys saying, I'm a nice guy. I'm like, really? You out doing charity work every week? Do you run you down at the church every week putting together the kids camp? Because I bet if you were doing that, women would find you attractive. I bet you're just kind of weak.